My husband looked straight at the judge and said, "She's lying. Don't believe a single tear she sheds." My mother-in-law smiled as if the case was already over. I looked at the judge, opened my mouth to defend myself, and suddenly the room started spinning. My knees gave out without warning. As people whispered, "She's pretending again," a military doctor leaped from the courtroom gallery, caught me before I hit the floor and shouted, "Nobody move. She's suffering a neurological emergency." Seconds later he pulled out a military document that made the entire courtroom fall silent. And for the first time that day my husband looked terrified. "My name is Captain Emily Carter. I'm 39 years old and for almost 2 decades, I proudly served as a logistics officer in the United States Army. My job was simple to describe but difficult to do. I made sure soldiers had exactly what they needed when they needed it. I believed preparation, discipline, and honesty could solve almost anything. I never imagined the hardest battle of my life would happen inside a family courtroom instead of overseas. 3 months earlier, I had filed for divorce after discovering my husband, Daniel, had secretly drained our joint savings to support risky investments he'd hidden from me. When I confronted him, he insisted everything was my fault. According to him, I was controlling, paranoid, and impossible to live with. Now we stood on opposite sides of the courtroom while a judge decided our future. Daniel looked perfectly calm in his tailored navy suit. His confidence wasn't surprising. Throughout our 19-year marriage, he'd mastered the art of sounding believable. Beside him sat his mother, Patricia, wearing the same satisfied smile she'd worn the day I married her son. She'd never accepted me, believing military service had made me too stubborn to be a proper wife. The hearing had already lasted nearly 2 hours when Daniel stood to answer questions. "I've tried everything to save this marriage," he said, sounding almost heartbroken. "But Emily has a history of exaggerating medical problems whenever she's under pressure." My stomach tightened. He wasn't finished. "She collapses whenever things don't go her way. She's done it before." Patricia leaned forward immediately. "Your Honor," she interrupted, "she's been pulling that trick for years. Every time she's challenged, suddenly she's too sick to continue." A few people in the gallery exchanged uncomfortable glances. The judge turned toward me. "Captain Carter, would you like to respond?" I slowly stood. "I have never pretended to be ill, Your Honor." Daniel gave a quiet laugh. That's exactly what she'd say. The words stung more than I expected. Not because strangers believed him. Because the man I'd loved for 19 years was deliberately turning my integrity into a joke. I opened my mouth to answer again, but something felt wrong. My vision blurred for just a second. I blinked. The room steadied. Probably stress, I told myself. I'd barely slept during the past week. The judge continued asking questions about our finances. I answered carefully, forcing myself to focus. Then another wave hit. This time my ears rang. The lights above seemed painfully bright. The polished wooden floor shifted beneath my feet. I reached for the edge of the witness stand without anyone noticing. "Not now. Please, not now." Daniel noticed my hesitation. He smiled. "There it is," he said, looking directly at the judge. "She's about to perform again." A few quiet chuckles echoed from the back row. Patricia crossed her arms. "I told you," she whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Heat rushed through my body. My heartbeat became strangely slow. My legs suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I tried taking one step forward. Instead, the courtroom tilted sideways. The judge's voice became distant. "Captain Carter?" Someone called my name again. I couldn't answer. My knees buckled beneath me. Before I could hit the floor, a man rushed from the public gallery, catching me with surprising speed. He immediately checked my pulse, looked into my eyes, then turned sharply toward the bench. His voice carried across the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, stop these proceedings immediately. This woman isn't pretending. She needs emergency medical care." No one spoke. The courtroom had been filled with whispers only seconds earlier, but now the only sounds were the military doctor's calm instructions and the frantic footsteps of court staff calling for emergency medical assistance. "Please give her room," he ordered. He gently supported my head while checking my breathing again. His movements were quick, practiced, and completely controlled. The judge leaned forward. "Doctor, who are you?" He looked up without taking his hands off my wrist. Colonel James Walker, United States Army Medical Corps, retired. I'm a board-certified emergency physician. The room grew even quieter. I treated Captain Emily Carter during her active military service. Daniel's confident expression faded. The judge stood. Do you know what's happening to her? Yes, Your Honor. He carefully adjusted my position. Captain Carter suffered a serious blast-related injury several years ago while deployed overseas. She recovered well enough to continue serving, but she developed a documented neurological condition that can be triggered by extreme physical or emotional stress. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Patricia immediately shook her head. That can't be right. Colonel Walker turned toward her. It is documented in military medical records. The courtroom doors opened as paramedics hurried inside with emergency equipment. Colonel Walker calmly explained my symptoms. Her pulse slowed suddenly. She experienced dizziness, loss of balance, blurred vision, and muscle weakness. These are consistent with episodes I've personally evaluated before. The paramedics nodded. One attached monitoring equipment while another checked my blood pressure. Within moments I slowly opened my eyes. Everything felt distant. The bright courtroom lights came back into focus first. Then the faces. The judge. The paramedics. Colonel Walker. Finally Daniel. He looked stunned. Emily, the judge asked gently, can you hear me? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Please don't try to stand. I managed a weak smile. I wasn't planning to. A few nervous laughs broke the tension. Colonel Walker helped me take slow breaths. Easy, Captain. Your vitals are improving. Daniel finally found his voice. She never told anyone it was that serious. Before I could answer, Colonel Walker looked directly at him. She didn't advertise it because she refused to let anyone think she wanted sympathy. He paused. That was one of the qualities every physician respected about her. The judge folded his hands. Captain Carter, were these medical issues documented while you were serving? Yes, Your Honor. I receive regular evaluations. Then why weren't they mentioned during these proceedings? I looked around the courtroom before answering. Because this case isn't about my health. It's about honesty. I never wanted anyone making decisions because they felt sorry for me. I wanted them to hear the facts. Silence settled over the room. Patricia suddenly spoke again. I didn't know. Her voice lacked the confidence it had carried only minutes earlier. Colonel Walker calmly replied. Not knowing someone's medical history is one thing. Publicly accusing them of faking a medical emergency is something entirely different. Patricia lowered her eyes. For the first time all morning she had nothing else to say. The judge looked toward the court reporter. Strike the earlier assumptions regarding Captain Carter's condition from the record. Then he turned back to Colonel Walker. Doctor, will you be willing to provide a formal medical statement regarding what you witnessed today? Absolutely, Your Honor. He reached into the leather briefcase he'd carried into court that morning. I actually have something even more important. He removed a sealed military medical envelope and placed it carefully on the evidence table. Looking directly at the judge, he said quietly, Your Honor, before this hearing continues, there's one document you need to read. The judge carefully opened the sealed envelope. Every eye in the courtroom followed his hands. Inside were official military medical records, treatment summaries, and one document clipped to the front with a yellow note. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading silently. After nearly a minute he looked up. Captain Carter, he said, these records indicate your condition was diagnosed almost 6 years ago. Yes, Your Honor. He turned another page. They also identify your emergency contact. I already knew the answer. So do I. The judge looked across the courtroom. Daniel Carter. My husband's face lost what little confidence he still had. The judge continued reading. According to these records, Mr. Carter attended multiple medical consultations, received written information explaining Captain Carter's condition, and signed emergency contact paperwork acknowledging the symptoms and treatment recommendations. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel swallowed hard. Your Honor. The judge interrupted him. Is this signature yours? He held up the document. Daniel looked at it for several seconds before quietly answering. Yes. The judge set the paper down. So when you repeatedly claimed your wife was pretending to be ill, you already knew she had a documented neurological condition. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His attorney slowly lowered his eyes toward the table. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I didn't know Daniel had seen those papers, she whispered. The judge answered firmly. Whether you knew or not, you publicly accused Captain Carter of faking a medical emergency without evidence. Patricia nodded once. She offered no further explanation. Colonel Walker remained standing beside me. I've treated hundreds of service members, he said calmly. Many continue living productive lives while managing invisible injuries. Captain Carter was one of the few who never asked for special treatment. He glanced toward me. In fact, she often minimized her own symptoms because she didn't want anyone questioning her ability to serve. The judge closed the medical file. The court appreciates your testimony, Colonel. Then he turned toward Daniel. Mr. Carter, credibility matters in every courtroom. You asked this court to believe your version of events while knowingly misrepresenting your wife's documented medical condition. Daniel stared at the floor. I made a terrible mistake. I finally spoke. No, Daniel. He looked at me. A mistake happens once. You repeated that story for years. You wanted everyone to believe I couldn't be trusted. His shoulders slumped. There was nothing left for him to argue. The judge looked toward both attorneys. Based on today's verified evidence, this court will evaluate the remaining issues according to documented facts rather than unsupported accusations. The hearing resumed with an entirely different tone. Financial records, bank statements, and testimony were reviewed carefully. Without the false narrative surrounding my health, the evidence spoke for itself. Several weeks later, the court finalized its decision. The division of assets reflected the documented financial records, and every finding was based on evidence presented under oath. When I walked out of the courthouse that final afternoon, I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't angry either. I simply felt lighter. For years I had carried the weight of defending myself against accusations that should never have existed. Now I didn't have to. As I reached the courthouse steps, Colonel Walker caught up with me. You did the hard part, he said. I only told the truth. I smiled. No, Colonel. You reminded everyone that the truth still matters. He returned the smile before walking toward the parking lot. I watched him disappear into the afternoon crowd, then took one long breath and headed toward my car. People can repeat a lie with confidence. They can even convince a room for a while. But when the truth finally arrives, with facts, integrity, and one honest witness, it doesn't just change the story. It changes the outcome.